Thank you so much. That was a really incredible presentation. I feel very lucky to have heard that, and I'm really happy that we were able to record that as well. So hopefully more folks will be able to access it in the future. So I'll start off with our first question. Are funding bodies likely to support the time required for Indigenous understanding?
It's a really, really good question. I feel that some funding bodies like the NSF have realized that this is needed. So there are calls now specifically about the Arctic that allows for a planning grant before you go into a large research grant. And for some of the people in the US that I know who have been working with Indigenous peoples around the Arctic, they have said that they were able to actually get funding for just going somewhere and being there, getting to know people before you start asking the research questions. So you can actually shape your research questions around the relationships that you've built. It's something to be very mindful of when you go into it, but I think also that some funding agencies will listen and understand that this is important. So yeah, and I think also there's a focus on long-term things now, data collection and all of these things. So if you put it in the right frame and you make a research project where the building of connections to human beings is just part of that long-term sampling scheme, I definitely think it's possible.
Thank you. So I'll let folks, it takes a while to type in those little boxes. Okay, we have a couple more coming in. So do you feel supported by supervisors and institutions in your approach?
Great. That's also a very good question. Yes and no. I feel that my own community or the society in Greenland, the students around me are incredibly supportive. But I also see that I put additional obstacles to myself in trying to work the way that I do. If one example could be trying to publish a paper and going through a peer reviewing process where I insist that I want to write in the acknowledgement something in Galashisut, in Greenlandic, or wanting to put information there that is important to a person and it has been important to my understanding of the data, but isn't something that is commonly present in a microbiological paper, for instance. So, but I feel that if you acknowledge that this is what you want to do and you are kind and you explain it to people, it will be accepted and people will find it interesting eventually. But I have to say also that some institutions also in Greenland are still quite old-fashioned and there's definitely work to do.
Thank you. So the next question is, can past research conclusions be questioned due to the attitudes researchers brought to their work?
Certainly. So I will give an example about the fermented foods. There's this, I have a passion about old books, the older the better. And one really amazing old book written by a former, I think he was a colony director, so a Danish person put into Greenland to have some sort of managing role in probably late 1900s. He wrote about how wasteful Greenlanders are, a notion that's still present today, that Greenlanders will shoot many seals and let them lie and rot just because they love shooting seals. And even if they were starving last winter, they will not make an effort to preserve these seals. But what this guy was describing, and he didn't know that, of course, was a fermentation process, an elaborate fermentation process, an actual action to preserve the seals. But because in his mind, fermented seal lying whole, everything included, is not appealing, he concluded that they must be rotting, and there's no biological distinction between rot and fermentation. Fermentation is just what we call the rot that we like. And Inuit, like back then at least, it was, people would prefer a seal to be fermented rather than frozen. They could have chosen to freeze these down, but in many cases they allowed them to sit there and ferment because there was more flavor, it was more interesting, and also probably more nutritious. So yes, this observation by a person who did not understand that this food was appealing made him conclude that Inuit are wasteful.
Thank you very much. So we have another question. Can you speak more about Kvyat and expand on the specific ways of fermentation processes to make it safe for consumption?
Yes, so Kvyat is made usually with this tiny little bird called the little auk. And you go little auk hunting. The auks arrive in northern Greenland in May, and you go hunting on the field with nets. So you catch them, and they're not shot or destroyed in any way. They're caught in nets and killed by hand. And then you take a seal and you take out the seal from the seal skin, but you keep the skin intact. And then you stuff in the birds, and there can be up to 600 birds in such a seal skin. And then you then you sew it very carefully together, and then you put it in a certain hole in the ground, not a deep one, just a shallow hole. And then you press out the air and you put on rocks. And you make sure, this is to make sure also that predators don't go in there. And then after a while, sometimes you open up and you smell it. And through the smell, people recognize whether it's a good fermentation or not. So it has to be through the personal experience with Kvyat that people evaluate whether it's safe to eat or not. And we don't know yet, also because this is not what I was investigating, as I noted before in the talk. We don't know yet what's the risk of it carrying bad microbes.
Thank you. We have another question in the Q&A. How can we push our institutions to bring these 7 principles as policies or otherwise?
It's also so many great questions. I really believe that when you tell someone honestly and openly about wanting to do something, people will listen. When students care about things, people will listen. And I also feel that it's important to bring specific examples. So I try to do that. I also try to do that in this talk. Really think about how the principles can apply to specific situations relevant to your institutions, and exemplify how it could be beneficial to do that. I think that's the way to go, because to people who are not using this way about natural sciences, for instance, I think that you can scare some people off if you just like bring it and you don't exemplify within their context how it can be valuable.
Thank you. I'll wait for another Q&A here. A couple just came in. Great. We have so many questions.
I'm so happy.
As grad students, often our advisors help define our relationship to our research. How could you speak about the relationship between you and your advisor through this process?
Yes, so I have been an independent postdoc for all the period of time that I've worked with our foods. So my advisors have been my family, have been the people that I've worked with. I've had mentors in the Greenlandic scientific community who understand the importance of looking positively at our foods, and that has been important for me. But I have also been lucky to be able to choose them because they're not my formal advisors. I did not apply for a postdoc with a specific professor, for instance. So I've had this opportunity to create this research from the bottom and determine myself which perspectives to bring into. And I fully understand that that's not always possible if you work with a supervisor who might not see eye to eye on these things. And I imagine that can be challenging, but I can only urge you to reach out to someone then who could be a co-supervisor, who will understand these things better, because it's a process around these things. Some people understand these things intuitively and some people don't. And some of those people are also because they have been trained in the natural sciences at academic institutions that don't even consider these things. So they need more time. But then I hope you'll be able to find someone else who can support you in these directions.
Thank you. So we have kind of, we could probably combine these two questions from Stinnett. First of all, is the storywork approach the best for doing work in Indigenous communities? And secondly, how did you incorporate more social science approaches into your natural science research?
Thank you, Stinnett, for asking questions. So nice that you're there. So I almost forgot the first question again, because I was thinking about the answer to the second one.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So is it the best one? Is it the best approach? I don't know. It is one approach, and I feel that they're not carved out tools. They are logics. They are ways of urging us to think for ourselves about these things. And we might not think that these 7 principles are the best way for us to understand them. And I certainly felt the first couple of times that I read them, not all of them, I wasn't sure how to understand all of them. But through doing my research, suddenly I felt like, okay, this is why interconnectedness is important, or this is where the concept of reciprocity comes in. So I don't know that they are the best. I don't think that we can measure them, but they are just being considerate and thinking about all of these things is the way to go, I believe. And whether you use those as your reminder to do that or something else, I think all of those will work. And the way that I've tried to incorporate, because I am not a social scientist and I am in deep water when I go into that kind of a field, for the Giviat project, going to Northern Greenland, I brought my amazing colleague, Menumina Lund Jensen, who works with the Greenlandic sled dog. And she went with me to help me cover those aspects. Or, I mean, I don't think that we can cover them and just tick it off like a box, but I needed her support to be able to tell me if I was doing something wrong or if I was missing an important piece of information, because I was focused on the sampling of the microbiology. I am a microbiologist. So Menumina was there to help me get social science information out of our trip.
So I guess there's a final part of Stinnett's question, which are lovely and layered. So do you consider yourself to be doing interdisciplinary research?
I think not really. I think my projects have great potential to be interdisciplinary, but I am a microbiologist. The tools that I use are bioinformatical. So I think the multidisciplinary aspect comes in when other people work with me, people with other backgrounds work with me, because I'm not a trained social scientist or anthropologist, and I will never be. projects and the results come out in collaboration with other people to see more of the truth than we can when we only look at things through natural science.
Thank you. So I guess there's a follow-up from the question about institutional support. Thinking about, those stricter impediments, like there can be prohibitions on taking your kids in research vehicles or to field camp field sites. Did you want to just expand a little bit about your experience?
Yeah, and it's not my recommendation to always bring your kids to do research. I mean, it was really tough. There were ups and downs with that, I have to say. In Greenland, in general, things are very free, and everyone loves family. Everyone loves a baby. So I've never come across any restrictions in any Greenlandic context where I could not bring my baby. So the University of Greenland is a very small place. So I'm sorry I don't have a lot of experience with how it would be in Canada, for instance, or in the US. There might be restrictions also due to safety concerns, but I've not experienced that personally. And I certainly feel that if there are any safety concerns, do not bring your kids.
So while hopefully there's a couple more questions being typed up, which takes a while, I wanted to ask about your perspectives, because this is a student conference, of course, we're mostly grad students, master's, PhD. So what can we do as, young researchers or early career researchers to try and integrate these principles into our research?
And well, the first step is just knowing that it's something that you can do and that there are principles. There is literature out there about doing research with Indigenous peoples, and again, just really being mindful about what you do. Try to see the interconnectedness and then think about what it means, what you do. How is it connected to other areas of research? I've been surprised working in the field of the human microbiome or fermented foods microbiome that there are more people than I expected working in that tiny cross field between social scientist or feminist science or decolonial science and the microbiome. So I think looking to those areas of research where people have actually made research about the kind of research that you do can be very helpful.
Thank you very much. So there's another question from Stinette about, could you speak more about your experience and the importance of relationships that promote co-production of knowledge and knowledge sharing? So I guess more of the relationship building aspect to it.
Yeah, it's not something that I do like intentionally. I don't think that it is authentic to sit down and think, okay, I need to build a relationship with this person. I have seen projects where they have not been able to build relationships with important community members, for instance, and therefore are not successful. So I can see that it is important. The only thing I can say is that this is really where the concept of bringing yourself as a person is the most important. Because if you try to meet someone from a point of, I need you to make this project successful, I know you are important to this piece of research, you are approaching that person from a purely professional point of view, and it's not an appealing way to be met. But if you meet people with the aim of getting to know them, who are they? And just as much let them be open to them getting to know you. I think this is the way to build those relationships.
Excellent. So there's one more question in the Q&A. In Canada, research fatigue in communities can be common. Could you speak about research fatigue in Greenland and your navigation of this issue?
Yes, it's a really important thing to be mindful of as well. One thing I struggle a little bit with how we balance as research communities between not giving research fatigue, but also not just giving people's data away to just anyone. Because in the scientific community, we work hard for the concept of open access to data, open access to scientific publications. But when we give someone's data away to other people, they can suddenly create new stories about that data. And we've seen in Greenland examples where this hasn't been the stories that people wanted out of themselves. So how do we do for to not back every time we want new data to the people? And I think it's we just have to acknowledge that it's there, and think about what kind of questions we ask, how we ask them, because in some cases people will think it's fun to be part of a project, while other projects are more straining if they take on sensitive subjects, for instance. So also knowing research has already been done or is being conducted is very important, because I know, at least in Greenland, when we have, because we, for instance, we have certain genetic variants in our own genomes, in our human genomes, that make us very interesting to scientists. And the people who have this specific genetic variant are often asked to be take part of research projects. And I just have to say that eventually some of us will have to say, okay, I'm not going to do this research because it's enough. But when that happens, it's difficult to say, also because it's up to people themselves if they want to take part in projects or not. I mean, so I think also another thing is that it's important to balance out what you offer to people. Don't offer so much that they will do things even though they don't really want to, is also a very important point. So it's very difficult to navigate. It is. This is why we're having this conversation.
Excellent. Well, maybe we'll wait another minute to see if any other Q&A come in, but did you want to speak a little bit more about your specific research? I know you were mostly talking about it in relation to this, but was there anything you wanted to share with us about your current research?
I'm not done with the results yet, but I can say that one of the things I want to look into, which I find really interesting, is how, when we eat fermented foods in Greenland, do some of the microbes from the fermented foods end up in our intestinal system, and do they persist there over time? I'm very interested in how eating an animal source diet compared to a plant-based diet impacts the gut microbiome in Greenland, because we have historically eaten an almost exclusively animal source diet, but still today our diet recommendations have a large focus on vegetables and whole grain. Was there another question?
Yes, there is. I guess this fits in really nicely. The question is, why is it that so many Greenlanders are lactose intolerant?
Yeah, so that's probably a genetic thing. Most of the planet actually is lactose intolerant. It is most of the people who have for thousands of years had cattle and therefore have adapted to drinking milk that are not lactose intolerant, like in Europe or certain parts of Asia and even Africa, where cattle is common, or goats or horses. So it's only those communities that have thousands of years of co-adaptation to drinking the milk of some livestock that have the ability to degrade milk, actually, once they are adults. Babies, of course, can degrade milk, but most adults on the planet can't.
That is super interesting. I don't think I knew too much about that historical context of milk drinking, but I guess we're nearly at the hour that we've allocated for this. And I just wanted to thank you so much for joining us on your Friday evening from Denmark.
It was a pleasure.
Yeah,
Thank you so much
been
for
amazing
all
to
the
hear from you.
questions. I'm really happy that people had questions. Thanks everyone for that.
And your information is on your slide there, I guess. So if people have further follow-up, they can reach you on email. And we've also been tweeting some of your presentation, and we'll have our recording up soon. So I'll come back to it for sure and watch it again because it was amazing.
Looking forward to that. Thank you so much, Lauren. And thanks for this opportunity. It was an honor to take part in this.